Let's fast forward back to about a year ago. If I were to ask you in a series between the New York Islanders and the Carolina Hurricanes who you thought would be the best goalie in that series, really think about who you would say. The fact that today we are saying Freddie Andersen is better than Ilya Sorokin and that Ilya Sorokin isn't even starting in a playoff series blows my mind. Well, welcome back to the channel. Today it's going to be another tier list Thursday, and you know what that means. We have a fun playoff style tier list in store. Now I'm filming this on Monday, so the Bruins are up against the Maple Leafs in games 2. Let's go Boston. But now we're going into this tier list, ranking between these 5 tiers that I have here. Now at the top, we're going to have only one player at the very top, and at the bottom, I'm going to allow myself to have 2 goalies in this category. So before we get into this, if you guys haven't subscribed to the channel, I do weekly tier lists and a bunch of hockey related content, so make sure you do that now, and let's get right into this one. All right, so let's start with my first goalie on this list, Thatcher Demko. Now, when it comes to Thatcher Demko, I'm a big fan of this guy's game. In his first game with the Vancouver Canucks, he has a .909 save percentage and a 2 goals against average against the Predators. He's already gotten 1 win under his belt, and I think coming back from that injury, he's still going to be a very, very talented goalie in this year's playoffs. The problem is, I don't think he's the best goalie in the playoffs. I think he's pretty close, so I'm going to put him in the elite category as the first guy in this tier. I think when it comes to the Canucks, one of the biggest things people are going to be scouting when playing this team is going to be Thatcher Demko, and rightfully so. This season, he had a very, very solid year, posting a .918 save percentage and a .245 goals against average with 5 shutouts and 35 wins in 51 games played. When it comes to Thatcher and the Canucks, look out, he's going to be one of the best goalies in this year's playoffs. Next goalie on my list, we're flipping over to the East Coast. We have Charlie Lindgren of the Washington Capitals. This guy has been one of the biggest surprises of the season. If you had told me that Charlie Lindgren would be starting in net, I guess I wouldn't be super surprised, but the fact that he put up this solid number in this season where the Caps haven't been great is kind of surprising in itself. Taking a look at his numbers from the year, a .911 save percentage with a 2.67 goals against average, and in his first playoff start, let's just say it wasn't really his fault that his numbers are this low. 871 save percentage, 4.06 goals against average against the President Trophy winners. I don't think anybody really has Washington winning in this series, but I don't want to say that I have Charlie Lindgren in the worst category because I think there are worse goalies in this year's playoffs. And I also kind of like Charlie Lindgren. I think that he's not going to be the reason that the Capitals lose. It's going to be a bunch of other things alongside of him as well. So we're going to put him over in the reliable category. I think he's been a reliable goalie all year, and I think that the Caps should be able to rely on him for the rest of this series, and if they continue on past this series as well. I think when it comes to Lindgren, you know what you're getting in net. The question is going to be really for the Capitals if their defense can hold up in front of him. I guess we'll have to wait and see. Now let's flip over to an Eastern Conference team with the New York Islanders, and surprisingly, we're going to be talking about Semyon Varlamov instead of Ilya Sorokin today. And in his first start with the New York Islanders, he was actually really good, posting a .920 save percentage and a .202 goals against average, with his season total being a .918 save percentage versus 2.60 goals against average. I think that Varlamov is going to be one of the more underrated goalies in this year's playoffs. I think most people would have him below the reliable tier, but I think he's been a very, very good backup for the Islanders this year. I'm still very surprised that Sorokin's not starting. I know that Varlamov was the hot goalie heading into the playoffs, but regardless, I would still assume that if you're paying a goalie over $8 million, that he would be the guy standing between the pipes. But here we are now, Varlamov. I can't put him any higher than Lindgren. I feel like they're both nice success stories for this season, so I'm going to put him in the reliable tier. I think he's going to be good for the Islanders for the rest of the year and for the rest of the playoffs as far as they get. Moving on to the next goalie on my list, I have Jake Ottinger out west. Now, he hasn't played in the playoff game yet this year, but in the past, I think we've seen Jake Ottinger is more than capable of taking this team on a deep Stanley Cup playoff run. He did it last year, taking them to the Western Conference Final, and the year prior, playing against the Calgary Flames, one of his best performances to date. Looking at his season numbers, though, he has a .905 save percentage, which is a little bit lower than you might have expected from Otter, as well as a 2.72 goals against average, with 3 shutouts and 35 wins on the year. Now, I really want to put Otter higher than reliable. I feel like he's going to be in the elite tier once he gets started in the playoffs, but with his season numbers, I can't really justify putting him any higher than the reliable tier either, especially when both Lindgren and Varlamov have better numbers than him this season. Yes, he had a tough year. Yes, it's not fantastic for him and he's playing on a great team, but I think he's going to turn things around and be a great guy in the playoffs, so I'll keep him in the reliable tier now. I don't think he's any worse than that. Moving on to my next guy, I have Igor Shesterkin, the other New York goaltender who, unfortunately for every other team, has finally found his game. When it comes to Shesterkin, this guy is already putting up great numbers in the playoffs, and we'll also talk about his season numbers. To start this playoffs, in his first game, he had a .952 save percentage and a 1 goals against average. And his season numbers, he has a .913 save percentage to go along with his 2.58 goals against average. I really do think that Igor Shesterkin is one of the best goalies in the league, and I believe he belongs in the elite category as well. Every year in the playoffs, he puts up great performances. He is not the reason that the Rangers were bounced last year. His playoff numbers last year were great as well. I think when it comes to Shesterkin, I wanted to put him in the best, but I still have one guy above him who I think is going to be the key and most elite player in this year's playoffs. But right now, I'm putting Igor Shesterkin in the elite category. He definitely belongs there. So if you're a hater of Shesterkin, comment why you think he should be any lower. And if you love him, well, he belongs in the elite tier. Moving on to another Eastern Conference goalie, we have Andrei Vasilevskiy. This one might be a little bit spicy because I know people are very high on his previous playoff performances, but let's take a look at his first game against the Panthers. He has a .926 save percentage and a 2.08 goals against average. His season this year, a little bit underwhelming, but he did come off a pretty serious back surgery, so we'll give him a pass for this year. He had a .900 save percentage and a 2.90 goals against average, 2 shutouts and 30 wins in 52 games played, helping the Lightning get themselves into the playoffs. I'm putting him in the reliable tier though. You know what you're getting with Vasilevskiy. The question is, are the Lightning going to be able to get past this first round and stop the firepower that is the Florida Panthers offense? So when it comes to Vasilevskiy, I don't think he's necessarily one of the most elite goalies in this year's playoffs. I wouldn't want to face him, but I'm going to stick him in the reliable tier. I think he belongs in that category this year. Prove me wrong, Vasilevskiy. I think he's going to, but I can't justify putting him any higher than like Ottinger and Lindgren right now. Just based on the performances I'm seeing, I just think that's where he belongs at this moment. Now let's flip back over to the Western Conference and do the other guy in a game that hasn't been played yet. I think it's going to be Adin Hill for the Vegas Golden Knights, so we'll talk about him in this situation. Obviously, if Logan Thompson's brought up instead because of Adin Hill not playing, then that can be talked about as well, but we're just going to focus on Adin Hill for today's purposes. Hasn't played in the playoff game yet, but to start the year, I think Adin Hill was honestly one of the best goalies this season. I think that he's going to have all the support in the world, and I think the Vegas Golden Knights are going to be a seriously deadly team this playoffs. I have him in the reliable tier as well. I think we know what we're going to get from him, but are we going to get another elite performance from Hill? That's left to be unseen. So for right now, I have him in the reliable tier. His numbers this season weren't great, so let's see if he can bounce back and have another heroic performance in the playoffs for the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, this one's going to be a little bit gross. Another Western Conference goalie. We have the Colorado Avalanche's Alexander Georgiev. I was rooting for Georgiev all year, and I'm not even blaming him for what's going on over in Colorado right now. First game against the Winnipeg Jets, easily the best playoff game so far. He posted some not so great numbers. A .696 save percentage to go with his 7.41 goals against average. Just brutal for Georgiev in his first game. But if you take a look at his season numbers, there's kind of a reason why he's struggling in the playoffs right now. He was playing so many games this season. I feel like he needed to get more of a break, and unfortunately for the Avalanche, they just didn't have another reliable guy to help him out in net. I don't want to put him here, but I think this is where he belongs at this point. I'm putting Georgiev in the untrustworthy tier. Again, that's not sustainable for any team. Even with the Avalanche putting up 6 goals, you can't have a goalie letting in 7 in the first game. It's just not going to work. Next, we have a fun little tandem one. We're going to the Boston Bruins. And first game, Jeremy Swayman was lights out for this team. And it seems like the Bruins are going to do a switch. Again, this is being recorded before game 2, so I don't know if it's going to be all marker if they're going to run with Swayman again. But taking a look at Swayman's number from this season, we have a .916 save percentage, a 2.53 goals against average. And in his first playoff game, he was dominant against the Leafs. He had a .972 save percentage and a 101 goals against average, which that one goal probably wouldn't have happened if the Bruins defense didn't collapse. But regardless, going over to Allmark, I think he's just as good as Swayman, and you're going to get the same kind of performance this year. A .915 save percentage with a 2.57 goals against average. These two are easily the best tandem in the NHL right now. I have these two in the best tier. I think some people might put Hellebuck here, but to me, I think that the Bruins are really dependent on their goaltending, and I think these two are going to be the most important and valuable pieces in this year's playoffs. They're both studs, and I really hope they tandem them this year because I think it's going to be so fun to watch every team try to guess who's starting in net every single game. I have these two in the best though. Next, let's move over to the LA Kings and Cam Talbot. This one's a little bit dicey for me. I have Talbot in the shaky category. His .913 save percentage and 2.50 goals against average on the season, they are solid and way above expected, but I don't know if this is the version of Talbot we're going to get in the playoffs. And when you're playing against a very offensively heavy Oilers team, I feel like you're going to have to face a lot of shots. And I just don't know if Talbot's age and capabilities are going to be able to keep up with that. I see the Kings getting knocked out in the first round personally, which means that I think the Oilers are going to get a lot of goals. I have him in the shaky tier. I think Talbot's good, but I don't think he's going to be a good player in this year's playoffs. Moving over to the other goalie in that series, this is also another guy I have in the shaky category, and that's Stuart Skinner. Sure, I love the way he bounced back with his .905 save percentage and 2.62 goals against average in 59 games played. He really took over that number one starter role after the terrible season that was Jack Campbell. And I do think that Stuart Skinner is a great goalie and he will get deep in the playoffs this year. The problem is I think it's going to be at a lot of goals and that the Oilers are going to have to score 4 to 5 a night in order to keep them in games. I don't think Stuart Skinner's really a problem for the Oilers, but I don't think he's going to be a reliable guy for them in the playoffs this year. I hope I'm proven wrong. I'm really rooting for Stuart Skinner this year, but I have him in the shaky category with Talbot as well. Next, let's stay in the Western Conference and talk about UC Saros and the Nashville Predators. In his first playoff game, he has an .850 save percentage and a 3.04 goals against average to pair with his season .906 save percentage and 2.86 goals against average. When it comes to Saros, I don't think it's going to be his fault, the same as Stuart Skinner, but I feel like there's just not going to be enough defense for him to remain in games, and that the Canucks' offensive weapons are just going to be too much for the Nashville Predators to handle. I will say though, I do have him in the reliable tier. I think that when it comes to UC Saros, he's an elite goalie and that he'll get a bunch of saves for the Preds this series. The question is it going to be enough, and is he going to be the difference maker? I don't see that happening, so I'm going to leave him in the reliable tier. Now let's talk about the other goalie that was involved in that insane offensive game, Connor Hellebuyck. In that first game, he had an .870 save percentage and a 6 goals against average to pair with his Vezina winning season, .921 save percentage and 2.39 goals against average. I was considering putting him in the best category, but I feel like the two guys over in Boston are just going to be too elite for him to match that. But I do think he's going to be the key to this entire postseason run for the Winnipeg Jets. Just last night's game, he was so elite and he kept them in that game. The amount of shots he had to face and the amount of high quality saves he made was just ridiculous. I think when it comes to them against the Avalanche especially, I think Connor Hellebuyck's the most important player in that series, and I do still have him in the elite category despite that tough first game. Let's head back out east and talk about the Florida Panthers and Sergei Bobrovsky. His first game, well, it wasn't exactly stellar. It was fine, but nothing crazy. I think for the Florida Panthers to also do well this year, I think goalie Bob's going to have to be the same, if not better than he was last year. In his first playoff game, he has an .895 save percentage and a 2 goals against average. This season, his numbers were really great, .915 save percentage and a 2.37 goals against average. I think he's going to be in the elite category for me as well. I think Bob's going to be a huge difference maker for the Panthers, and I think he's going to keep them in a lot of games. I actually considered putting goalie Bob in the very best tier. He was one of my final 3 candidates for that spot, but I just feel like this year the Panthers are going to be relying more on their offense than they will goaltending, and I don't think he's going to have as great of a performance as he did last year. I don't think that's a knock for the Panthers. I still think they're going to go deep, but for me, goalie Bob's going to stay in the elite tier. Next, let's give some flowers to arguably one of the best goalies down the stretch in Freddie Anderson. His first playoff game, a .971 save percentage with a 1 goals against average. This season, since coming back from his blood clot injury, he has a .932 save percentage and a 1.84 goals against average. 13 wins in 16 games played with 3 shutouts this season. That's insane. I actually considered putting him in the best tier as well. He was one of the guys that I was like, how can you argue against some of these performances he's had all year? But I'm going to put him in the elite category. I don't think it's really a knock on Anderson. I think it's just talking about how many good goalies there are in the league this year. I think if you look at Swayman's first performance compared to Anderson's first performance, there's really no denying who was the guy who really kept their team in the game. I do think, though, that Anderson's going to be a crucial piece to this team all postseason long. I think they are very blessed to have him back in their lineup. I have him in the elite tier as well. And last but not least on my list is the Toronto Maple Leafs and Ilya Samsonov. I really wanted to put him a little bit higher than Georgiev, but I can't justify it. I think every goal he let in against the Bruins was incredibly soft. I don't think he's built for the postseason. I think this whole year in general has just been really brutal for Samsonov. I'll give it to him. He was able to turn it around at the end of the year with his .890 save percentage, finishing it off with a .313 goals against average. But in his first game, he had an .833 save percentage and a 4.08 goals against average, which just isn't going to do it for the Toronto Maple Leafs. This team really needs their goaltending to step up, and I think the biggest criticism for them is that they don't have defense in front of Samsonov. So really talking bad about Samsonov is more about the Leafs defense than anything else. I think if he had some better defensemen in front of him, he'd be stopping more pucks, but I also think that he's let a few soft ones in, and I think the moment's just going to be too big for him. So I have Samsonov in the untrustworthy tier as well. I don't trust him to do well this playoffs, and I actually see the Leafs being bounced in the first round. No bias, of course. But this is my NHL goalie playoff tier list. Let me know what you guys think about my list, who you would move up and who you would move down. Again, I would not argue with anybody if you wanted to bump Connor Hellebuyck or Sergei Bobrovsky above the Bruins tandem. I think we need to see a little bit more from them, but from what I've seen from Swayman so far and how unpredictable it's going to be for teams to play against Boston game in, game out, not knowing who the starter is going to be, I think it's going to give Boston a huge edge in this year's Stanley Cup playoffs. But let me know what you guys think about all of this. Comment some other stuff you would like to see in the future, tier list and other playoff formats you would like to see from me as we go through the rest of the playoffs. Like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. I'll see you guys in the next one.